Well, thanks for joining us on this one of the last panels today. We're going to get some perspectives from some of my old analyst friends like Ray, of course. But I'd like to introduce the panel. With me, of course, is Rosemary Cochran, principal and co-founder of Vertical Systems Group. Also joining me again is Ray Mota, chief executive officer and principal analyst of ACG Research. Grant Lenahan, partner and principal analyst of Appledore Research Group, and finally Charlie Reed, who I've known for a long time as well, at Atlantic-ACM. I'd like to bring everybody on stage to have a little chat about the key takeaways from this awesome event we've been at.
More water.
Right. Great. Thanks everybody for joining me. It's a great panel of friends here. I guess we'll just kind of jump around because there's a lot of different perspectives here. But if I have each of you cite what you thought were the top trends, during this event. Of course, it's all about NaaS, network as a service. But I'll start with you, Rosemary, and we'll go down the way here. Yeah.
For the trends?
Yeah, the key trends that you saw. Yeah.
Can I do the Sean Friday 5?
Sure. I got to tape that tomorrow, actually.
How many of you follow Sean on Lightwave? I'm just curious. Well, you should. And on Fridays, he does a Friday 5, and he has 5 stories or news items. So I said, well, there's so much to talk about here. So if you just, pardon me, I was going to start with a
top 5. There you go.
Well, a Wednesday 5. So, right?
Go.
So this is the Wednesday 5. Quickly, and then I'll let my colleagues here talk about the details, but I thought, number one, all the progress at MEF, lots happened in the last year, and certainly before that, but the last year seems like quite a bit of progress. And the scope of the MEF team and everything that's happened in terms of the progress relative to all of the things that are happening with service providers and tech vendors, but it's great to hear that enterprises are going to be part of that too. So that's number one. Number two is the LSO Audit Mission Summit and the API adoption, and Daniel Barlev did a wonderful job, and that whole day on Monday was dedicated to that. So that was number two, big interest in LSO, seller and buyer. And number three, NaaS, of course, and the ecosystem of NaaS, which has got a lot more to talk about. 4 was the MEF-CECP announcement, which was very interesting to have that many vendors and service providers get certified for SASE. And number 5 is what's next.
Okay, there we go. That's a good start. Ray? To you.
Yeah, no, I think I break it down into a few different components that stood out for me the most. The first part was the integral part of the alignment and collaboration with the with the MEF, the TM form, TW. I mean, that becomes an important part to make things happen. So I think the alignment and collaboration. The other part, number 2, was just looking at embracing the enterprise voice, right, from an MEF perspective, and Sunil's doing a good job bringing these people on board, because these are people that we need to listen to, especially because they're the ones that have to make these key decisions and have their gun to their head. So to me, that was a big standout of having that and embracing them and getting them to engage and listen to the use case. The third part of it was more related to the whole AI, or not really AI, I would say more of the API type capability from the standpoint to say, how do we get these APIs fully integrated and federated so that we could do cross-domain and cross-network communication. The third part, I would say, was, which is good because it's important, about the customer experience side of it. How do we build these networks, right? So they're like cloud-like, right? Before we used to use just CLIs, and now getting to the point, because that's going to increase how we develop these networks in a more simpler way, and we could focus on more advanced skills. And then the last piece, which is important to me, was related to, does this make business sense? right? Does it make business sense? So the whole part of adding the business value, which you normally don't see from some type of technical forums. So I think those 5 things to me stood out the most there.
Okay, Grant?
Well, thank you. And I like something you said. Leave it to Ray to point out something that I overlooked to my own detriment. And so I'm going to use that kind of to start out, is that one of the things I really liked that was a big theme here was that there was a focus on practical things that would either immediately or in the fairly near term generate revenue. There's 2 points to that. There's, your point about the Enterprise Council. Yeah. It's critical. These are the people, this is where the money begins. Yeah. Comes from their purses to our purses to suppliers' purses. It's a chain. And that's very tied to some other numbers that I heard. I can't remember who put them up, so my apologies to whoever I'm slighting. So I'll quote our own research, where a few years ago we looked at just in WAN, SD-WAN, secure service edge, attainable public cloud access, an attainable $101 billion of incremental revenue. But at least our conclusion, whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong, is that that would only come if you had a really agile as-a-service system. If you were doing bespoke, custom-crafted, brittle managed services, you'd probably win some of it because security is a huge issue, but you wouldn't win all of it, right? So that then goes to, I'm now swapping around on my numbers because it tells a story. The idea that this show, and I think what was interesting today, yesterday and the day before, was that we were moving from the vision of NaaS and all that is in there, being able to order transport, secure transport, edge security, et cetera, vertical services, to reality. Yes, there were visionary talks, but there were also talks like the one that we just had, where groups of people were doing real research on basic questions of how do I make this more automated and more intelligent. So this idea of, yeah, vision's great over here, reality is even better getting there. And I kind of observed something else that I called it a barbell distribution, kind of like, a weight set with all the bells on one side and the other, where we had things like Dave Ward giving us an extremely visionary, view of where things are going, right? Several years out, but, he has a clear end goal. And then others which were, deep into how are we going to make this happen? Great example, Console Connect saying we're going to put our mapping tool out there for more to add to, improve, and use, and make APIs really, really work. There was something that when I began writing this list, and I began writing it yesterday as I was going through the event, I was a little concerned that I didn't hear enough discussion of boring under the cover stuff like autonomous networks and autonomous software. Because if you do autonomy right, you're like 90% of the way there to an intent-driven API. It makes life much, much simpler. And I was just going to kind of poke the industry until, well, Sue from Netcracker got there ahead of me, and then Michael from Amartis got there ahead of me, and then Paul from Console Connect got there ahead of me. And to me, I've never been so happy to be proven either wrong or obsolete in my life, right? Because they came and said something that's a little techy, a little boring, but really critical to making this work. So that's kind of my view.
Automation, yeah, okay. John?
Great, and close to that, we've hit on most of the topics, so I'll keep it short, but I think for me, going to this conference, what always stands out is there's incremental change. I've been going for 10 years, and these networks are hard to improve on, hard to implement this stuff, and it was heartening to see essentially the kind of core LSO API adoption really take off and have, real presence and kind of be the go-to, particularly when it comes to transactions among providers. And that's a real difference. And I think just watching that, incremental change continue and sort of maybe a little bigger this time. And I think for me, I guess trend takeaways is, the underlying trend is the increased interest in other types of access and the advancement in utilization of LSO APIs when it comes to internet, wavelength, And I think one that was interesting that came up a bunch, which is not integrated, but sort of on the access topic, is LEO satellites was a big one. So that was an interesting trend for me. I think, trend-wise, obviously, AI talk is very interesting to try to get our heads around. We're all trying to learn about it. But I learned a lot just from talking to folks in the data center and the transport space to kind of pinpoint where those demand vectors are between, what the training data centers are needing, really have a framework for thinking about what inference and I believe it was AI agents and what's kind of needed there. And I think just to have kind of some real demand that we've seen in announcements from Lumen and others, evolve and have folks here kind of have their mind around it is helpful. And then I guess, from NaaS in general, I think that it provides a word that encompasses what has been going on in the MEF for a long time, which is the automation, iteration. I think we're sort of centering around what that means to each person, and I think it as a movement is continuing to kind of have momentum and keep our industry moving forward.
Great. I just want to come back to something, I think Ray said this about, inviting enterprises, and the other thing I noticed was some talk about, enabling smaller providers that, may need to sell bandwidth to another bigger provider, and, how do you enable that? I'll have the whole panel, but I'll start with Ray first, because since you mentioned.
I think the part about this, right, there's a few different perspectives if you're, they don't like to be called tier ones and tier twos, by the way. They're like regionals or national.
Yeah.
I found that out the hard way, by the way.
Don't call them an I-like either.
The regionals and nationals, but I think from the perspective, it has to be from the standpoint, like when you look at certain technology, whether it's AI, when I talk to many of them, I'm like, hey, this could level the playing field somewhat if it's done correctly, right? You could leverage some of the technology so that you can compete more effectively, developing the right use cases to an audience that you don't normally have the CapEx budget to do, right? So in this particular case, I kind of focus on for these regionals or nationals to say, I actually see this as an opportunity to be able to level the playing field and go after a market because there's technology to be able to go after that. Now, the part on the NaaS side of it, we can talk more about it, right? It's more of a matter to say, what is a propensity to buy and willingness to pay, and who is my targeted market, right? And for the mid-size providers, they need to do a stronger job of identifying what you call their vertical personas, right? So if you're going after healthcare, right? And I've been on the road with some of them, and I'm like, you're not speaking their language, right? Meaning that they're going in there just with a common thing as opposed to talking about HIPAA or even HIPAA compliancy, for instance, right? You can't say you're HIPAA compliant. You can say, I could enable you to be HIPAA compliant. I could enable you to be PCI compliant, or if you're talking to a government, I could enable you to be FIT compliant. So even with NaaS, I think in that case, they still need some piece of that. The tier ones have much bigger resources to do that, but that's an opportunity where they could win more business with that there and leverage AI.
Grant, you want to? Yeah.
You said tier one.
Yeah, I did. Tier ones are okay with it. It's tier twos and tier threes that get offended.
But to pick up on your point, I mean, I think you really discussed that well, so I just wanted to take it to a different story, which is, I believe this whole idea of globals, and I mean, part of the problem is they're not just nationals and regionals. They're globals where everybody's operating out of region, right? And with global supply chains becoming digital supply chains and digital commerce with, CAD files being shipped around and orders coming from everywhere, I believe that we're going to see much larger needs for secure, constantly changing WANs that aren't interconnecting the locations of a company, but are interconnecting the locations of a company, some of its customers, its supply chain, and others. And this means there is a need, if we want to serve the economy and our customers as an industry as best we can, there's going to be a lot more of this buying what used to be called access service requests, ASRs. And in the old days, there were two problems with that. The first is you had to go to every one individually, which was really hard to get a view of what your options were. The second thing is they were brutally complex to fill out. So it was slow and labor intensive. I think if we get the NaaS thing right, and we get intent right, and we get the whole LSO set of APIs, right? That's not just an API for the service. It's one to qualify and order and assure. In fact, there was a demo on troubleshooting that's out in the lobby. We can enable something that the industry could really benefit from, which is a marketplace. And Amazon.com for bandwidth. So you can go there and see you've got the expensive good one and the cheaper, not quite as good one, the one that's wireless and therefore can't get cut by a backhoe, and the one that can get cut by a backhoe but goes faster. And actually that might be a very interesting place to be able to go if you're a giant global company serving a supply chain and you got to go to 40 different locations and get underlay. And I used up my time, so I'll be quiet.
Okay, Charlie.
So the question was around tier 2 providers or connecting with tier 1. I mean, I think the marketplace is a key element, and it's important to understand the role of MEF and different participants. And I think the key player there is going to be marketplace providers like ConnectBase and folks that pick the language and make it easy for these smaller providers to participate at a low cost. And I think everyone's involvement in that and the large carriers' participation in engaging and kind of opening up their systems to enable that is moving it forward. And I think I think that the smaller providers, they can invest a lot, but luckily there's ecosystem participants here that are making it easier for them. I think it's come a long way.
Okay, Rosemary, to you, because we do talk about that a little bit too, but yeah.
Yeah, so we've got network as a solution kind of right now, and
right.
It's not simple. I mean, there are a lot of very specific things. As we talked about the awards last night, and number one was connectivity, which is really the basis in terms of what's going on, and there are a lot of things that are issues there relative to LSO APIs and having the ability to process those things. But the connectivity is changing so quickly. We were talking about, heard Dave Ward and other, people talking about the capacity issues, especially when you have AI. This is like jumping amazingly. I mean, we're tracking the, wavelengths and, 400 gig, and then you're going up to 800, and it's going to go, higher. So when you start to look at all those kinds of things, it's more than just that. And then you've got other types of connectivity as well, fixed wireless, and what's installed in the floor. So I mean, you've got a lot that has to go there. But in addition to that, we've got applications. We talked about applications, and those I agree with Ray about the verticals, and it's a big difference selling to a financial entity as to a healthcare provider or the federal government or anything in between. So there's those kinds of issues relative to what the what the goal is for that application, and then everything around that becomes one of getting down to how to sell this. How do we support it? How is it going to be managed when you have AI that is now part of the solution? And frankly, I mean, we're talking about a whole different level of engineering knowledge, of the ability to make those transformations in terms of what is there. There's a lot of legacy applications out there that are not going to go away anytime soon. So the network as a solution, I think we need to be clear about how that's going to work going forward, and it's not a simple journey.
Right. And so how, given all that, I'll post it to everyone else, like how do we give, people guidance on how to take advantage of NaaS? Ray talks about, understanding the industry you're going after. If you're going after a government agency, they have, like you said, compliance and all those crazy, contract vehicle names that they have, and or a healthcare provider or a financial. I mean, how do we make it so we can adapt to those different environments? Yeah.
And
yeah, I mean, I can start there. I mean, there's primarily a few factors you have to understand, meaning that you don't go in there with a technology solution. You go in there with either a challenge or an opportunity discussion, not NaaS, right? So literally it should be like, what challenge are you facing? Is it taking too long to deliver these services? Are you getting your net promoter score down? Or you're looking at an opportunity to expand or merge from that perspective? And then based on that, right, then you determine to say, hey, we've got multiple options from that, right? And NaaS could be one of those, right? But if you don't give them visibility, right, and they need to have visibility, they need to have a level of control, because they don't want to make sure they have control, and you need to give them a proper TCO that's minimum 19% or higher, otherwise it's not worth for them to switch. And what I've seen is with some telcos and tier ones, they aren't doing enough of that, and they're not getting the deals because they don't give the customers, and the customers feel like they're losing ownership of that there. So I think that's the part there,
Okay, Grant?
Yeah. Well, I think I agree. You're fundamentally saying sell the sizzle, not the steak.
Exactly.
Right.
Right.
The one thing, just to take, only to complete the thought, to take the other side, is we need to be careful of saying, because all of our customers have different wants, we have to do completely custom solutions, because that's a good way to be slow, high cost, and low feature. And a really good example is looking at companies that could be this industry's biggest competitors or just a big part of it, and that's the hyperscalers. And they took a very standardized approach. But their value proposition was, we're going to build incredibly automated, incredibly reliable, incredibly powerful technology, but we're only going to build it once. Right? Now, they may customize certain things to you, but whether it's AWS or Azure or GCP, you're buying more or less the same thing, with the exception of, like, for Edge RAN with Nexus, right? You're buying the same thing. Even the government, even three-letter agencies are buying the same thing.
Interesting. Charlie?
So the question is how to take advantage of NaaS or advice on that front. I think, it's hard being a service provider. You have a legacy network. You have all these different elements. It's hard to move. I guess you go to this conference and you see what folks like on the cloud front are doing, and I guess you would just have to think about NaaS as a goal as you develop new products, to just be like, make it simple, stupid, and really enable these features and push yourself to make that, and then percolate it across the network. And even though it's hard, bang the drum on the different technology providers, bang the drum on the staff, and don't be afraid to make the changes. As far as taking advantage of the demand dynamic, it's a little unclear whether there's NaaS demand, but there's certainly demand for flexibility, more focus on the complex security and cloud connectivity elements of a network versus just connectivity. So you just have to be ready to have those conversations and display that element of IT to the customers through portal or through the partners that you work with, and just understand that's the landscape and how you're going to participate in it with staying with kind of what you're good at.
Good.
I'd go. As Charlie was saying, I think cybersecurity has really been not really talked about a lot with NaaS, and I think that's a critical piece. And that's a nonstop challenge. It's never going to be fixed per se, but it's it's something that is going to have to be addressed.
Sure.
In the context of the NaaS vision, of the applications and of the control and of all the other pieces of it that that a customer would want to have relative to changing from a legacy or a existing network to another model that is that is very different and has a lot of different pieces of it. But I think cybersecurity is one of the things that wasn't really in that the kind of the list of things that are there, along with the cloud and other aspects.
Yeah, I mean that should be a whole another webinar or something.
It's definitely.
But since we're running on to 30 seconds here, I'll just have everybody just give 10-second quick ending thoughts, and we'll wrap it up. Yeah.
I'd say my quote of the day was rings are for marriage, not for network design. Or that I wrote down because that was my favorite quote of this event. There. So.
I just want to pick up on what Rosemary was saying and remind everybody that security, cyber and other electronic on-net security, is a huge and growing problem. As somebody noted, we're only spending something like 2.5% as a globe, right, of what we're saving from it, or what the threat is. And there are forecasts that we're only going to have something like 30% of the smart engineers necessary to do it manually, piece by piece. So it has to be automated, and it has to be outsourced to groups, and we can be the big winners. There's a lot of money there.
Charlie, to you.
I mean, I think, final thoughts. I would say continue the effort to push each other and push yourself to maintain, relevance over the next 2 decades in this changing ecosystem by, looking forward to security and participating in AI transport and all the trends you're seeing today.
Great. Well, we're just about out of time, but Rosemary, I'll come back to you one more, for just a moment. Sorry.
No, I did talk about. Yeah, I think we're good. I think there's a lot to be done, and there's a lot of very intelligent people in this room who are going to make it happen.
That's true. Well, thanks again to the audience, and thanks to my great friends and panelists here. It's a pleasure to see these folks in one room, and to everybody here. Have a great rest of your conference. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean.